So if I asked many of you, what is Marvel's Spider-Man? Have you played a Marvel Spider-Man game? You'd remember this game, whether you're a fan of Xbox, which I am not proudly sponsored by. Xbox, hire me. Like, sponsor me, I need money. You'd think of this game for PlayStation that maybe wouldn't be mentioned if I was sponsored by Xbox. Regardless, there actually was another big Spider-Man game way back in the year of 2000. Year of our Lord 2000, because Spider-Man also existed back then. Yeah, the naming convention is, it's getting a little confusing, isn't it? There's a lot of just Spider-Mans. Now, this game for the PlayStation 1 was an absolute classic, holding it so that it hopefully doesn't glare your eyes out. Now, this game was actually released on several different consoles. It was released on PlayStation 1, Dreamcast, N64, PC. This thing was all over the place, but when you bring up Spider-Man, a lot of people, except old people like me, don't really bring this game up. And as they say on the back of the box, you don't just play it, you live it. Now, whereas the PlayStation 4, now playable on PlayStation 5 remastered, Marvel Spider-Man goes in on comics, but also is really trying to actually capture this real life New York vibe. This game is very clearly focused on a comic booky or cartoony feeling with Spider-Man and his Rogues Gallery. It seems very inspired by the 90s cartoon, Spider-Man the Animated Series, along with just Spider-Man's classic comic books of that era, of the 90s. So this is really going in on that demographic. If you're a fan of Spidey comics, this is definitely for you. Now, the story involves not only Spider-Man, but many other popular Spider-Man characters and Marvel heroes that are made reference to as well. And, a good example of this is actually Daredevil. He shows up very early on in the game, even before the middle point, and Spider-Man is framed in the opening scene for a crime involving a reformed Dr. Otto Octavius, who then Spider-Man then goes on the run, actually, for the remainder of the game, trying to clear his name. He comes across Daredevil during this entire story. Daredevil actually questions him on, what's going on. Spider-Man kind of proves himself to Daredevil, and they go on their separate ways. They even know the Daredevil lore here as well, because they make reference to the fact that Daredevil can tell if anyone is lying due to their accelerated or average heartbeat, a power that probably wouldn't work if someone had an irregular heartbeat, but nonetheless, Daredevil's awesome. So they know their stuff in this. And I think one thing that's really cool actually about the game, if we're looking at the world itself and the tone of it, is how much they respect the source material, not only of the comics, but of the creators. For example, Stan Lee. Stan Lee is well respected in this game. He actually shows up doing a voiceover in every new overarching area or actual main area chapter. And what I mean by this is because this game is divided into levels, those levels are also placed under overarching areas. For example, an entire area is the Daily Bugle building, but there's about 3 levels located in it. At the beginning of every new area, not level but area, so probably about 4 or 5 times in this game, we get to hear Stan Lee give a dramatic, overarching kind of theme narration in his classic Stan Lee way about the levels, such as this.
Welcome, true believers and newcomers alike. Spider-Man co-creator Stan Lee here. Once again, we find our hero Peter Parker, better known around the world as the Amazing Spider-Man, in a heap of trouble. But this is just the beginning, Spidey fans. So get ready for a true superhero action thriller, packed to the brim with thrills and chills, twists and turns, more supervillains than you can shake a web at, and of course, non-stop web-slinging, wall-crawling action.
I always thought that was really fun. I thought that added to it and showed just how committed they were to that demographic and to respecting the material that they were working with, which, believe it or not, was a big deal at the time. We've had a lot of Spider-Man games. Some of them are really good, some of them are really mediocre, some of them are bad. And this was really trying to capture the feeling of Spider-Man in the year 2000, which was certainly a task. Now, the gameplay in this, like I said, it is level-based, it is not open world. There's a lot of reasons for this, including technical limitations, obviously. Open world was not easy, and a lot of games that did have open worlds, especially at this time, they had very focused progression through those worlds. You can even look at something earlier like Final Fantasy VII. Yes, there was an open world, but because of the scale of the game, the graphics were also a little bit less than maybe they could have been if it wasn't. But that fit Final Fantasy VII. That wouldn't have worked for Spider-Man. Now, with the level-based gameplay, it does make sense, and it is interesting because this allowed a very, very focused and tight experience. It didn't feel like anything was ramrodded into this game, and the technology at the time wouldn't have supported anything bigger than this really easily either. Now, the combat isn't super in-depth, but it is functional, and it holds up relatively well for a game from that era. Now, this was before the whole Spidey sense mechanic. That was introduced much later on, and that had been fully worked out, by the time of Spider-Man 2, the game based on Raimi's second film starring Tobey Maguire. That was really where, in my opinion, the spider sense mechanic was well worked out. In this game, essentially, if you're going to get hit, you have to move back, or you have to jump, you have to dodge, you have to get out of the way. It's not really just a press of the button, it's much more intentional. Now, does this make some things clunky? Yeah. Oh yeah, 100% it does. But again, a product of its time for sure that still really does hold up. And speaking of holding up, there are some things that this game was doing well that not a lot of other games of this era were doing, and something that we haven't seen enough of out of superhero games until probably the last 5 years. That was actually cosmetics. And now it's not just cosmetics in this game. There are tons of costumes with unique powers and abilities that are unlockable. You want to be invincible? Okay, well, go ahead and play as the Captain Universe version of Spider-Man, where he has these cosmic powers and he can't be killed. Fine, play as him. You have to unlock it, but you definitely can. And there are cheat codes to unlock it as well, by the way. So you can just kind of mess around with this game if you want to in current day. But also, if you want something like the symbiote suit, you won't run out of webbing, which does go along with the comics because the symbiote suit was able to sort of create an unlimited supply of organic web tissue from the symbiote. He didn't need web shooters for that. And so those things tie into this game. Then again, if you want to play as someone like a quick change Spider-Man, you have a limited amount of web cartridges available to you. So these are all very smart and intentional. They knew what they were doing with the cosmetics, and this was ahead of its time for sure. Now, overall, I absolutely love this game. Are there things that don't hold up about it? 100%. For example, the graphics, they don't look great anymore. Totally. Definitely do not look fantastic. But other than that, the world feels very alive for the time that it came out in. The webbing works, the combat works, swinging works as good as it could have at the time, and it really did respect the source material of Spider-Man. It's a game that has sadly been sort of lost to the ages because it's just been left behind to die. It never really has gotten ported up much at all to anything new. But if you're able to find this game, it is relatively cheap online. It is just titled Spider-Man. My version is on the PS1, and that is the version that you have been watching all of this footage for. It all is just really fun. There's not a lot to complain about in this game. Is it dated? Absolutely. This is a product of its time. It came out in the year 2000, so it's not really operating by, 2020 standards of what we would expect nowadays from Spider-Man. Totally. But it is a really fun game that I think any fan of classic Spider-Man or of the Peter Parker Spider-Man comic books should definitely check out. It's a game that a lot of people forget about, but it's one that really does deserve to be remembered for sure, because it is one of the things that got me into superheroes. I know it got a lot of people into Spider-Man as a character. This was sort of a gateway drug for Marvel in the video game industry, and it worked out fantastically. Anyways, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Were you a fan of this Marvel Spider-Man, just called Spider-Man, on the PlayStation, Dreamcast, N64, PC? It's all over the place. Were you a fan of this game? Were you not? Have you played it? Have you not gotten a chance to? And would you like to at some point? Let me know your thoughts down below. If you have any other suggestions, by the way, for games that people forgot about, I would love to hear those in the comments down below, because these are actually kind of hard to come up with. I want to find these games that I think not as many people know about, but that the people who do, maybe it's fallen out of the spotlight, maybe it's not as big anymore, or people just don't really think about it. I have a few different series that I'm thinking of that haven't made games in like a decade. I would love to hear more from you. the audience, because you make this all possible. Without you, none of this content would mean anything, and I'm very grateful for all of you. Have a fantastic day, everyone. Subscribe if you enjoyed it, please. Helps out the channel a lot. Leave a like, leave a comment. We appreciate you. Have a fantastic one, and stay shway.